You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
Uh-oh. Hey, my friends. It's Matt. Do you remember a couple days ago when I did that bonus episode? And I was like, hey, my family, we're going on this gigantic trip, this once-in-a-lifetime thing. We're going to leave in a few days. It's going to be amazing. And I don't think I said it out loud, but implicitly I was like, it would sure be a bummer if I got sick, because it'd be real hard to get everything done before I go, and then I'd have to travel, and I wouldn't feel good, or I'd maybe just have to stay home. So, anyways, if you didn't catch it, there's a bonus episode on Saturday, and it was long, and we talked about a whole bunch of cool things that are going on. And if you're not into bonus episodes, maybe you're like, I don't like fun, I don't like songs that make me smile and that totally jam, I don't listen to bonus episodes. Well, perhaps I could impose on you this one time to make an exception and go check that one out, even if you only go listen to about the minute 14 mark, because right there is where we talk about the new stickers. We're doing stickers, and it's more than stickers. It's a whole thing, and I think you're really going to dig it. And also, I decided to use the first minute or so of our time together today to see if I could get my voice to warm up and sound better. And the answer is no, I could not. This is just how it's going to sound. One of the many things that I have enjoyed about being a parent is watching the evolution of my children's development as storytellers. And along the way, regardless of what age they are, I always enjoy noting what details stand out to them when they recount an event, especially the kind that I was there to see with them. You learn a lot about where their head's at and what values they have and what they would really want a third party, somebody who's hearing the story, to take with them and empathetically through the story feel along with them. And so that's always a blast. And really, this works on adults too, because you can have the same set of events happen in front of a whole bunch of different people, and maybe 20 people will tell a story afterwards, and nobody's lying. They just, to them, the narrative, the theme, the meaning of it is different, and you can detect what people make of the story, how they internalize the story, what, again, they think the story means based on what details they emphasize and what details they even omit. We are in such a situation with the author of Esther. This time, as we get to verses 23 and 24, what we're going to get is the author's very succinct retelling. And I think you're going to be surprised, as I was when I broke this down a little bit ago here before I got on the microphone, as to what those points of emphasis are, and maybe even more interestingly, what those points of emphasis aren't. Here's the story. Verse 23, so the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, I guess this is the beginning of the story, verse 24, for Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. That's the end. Also, do you remember the other day when I was like, blah, 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 I'm going to try to do a super manly reading voice, like the white letters on the black screen thing? And that was very hard for me because it's not how my voice is. And now I would just like to sound civilized and like a person you would want to hang out with without holding your hands up in a cross shape to make me go away so I don't disease you. And now all of a sudden I have no choice but to sound that way. Whatever. Did you catch that though? I mean, what was evident, what popped in that story and what didn't? I think it's fascinating. Look at how much stuff there is about Haman. I'm going to read some of it again. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. So there's that triplicate again. Remember, we've seen the triplicate for emphasis throughout the book of Esther with things like kill, annihilate, and destroy. So we're going to triple down on exactly how connected to this feud, this rage, this violent anger toward the Jews Haman is. His parentage goes all the way back, and he's just straight up, even if you don't know what all of that means, the Hammedatha and the Agagite business, he's an enemy of the Jews, triplicate. Okay, that's a lot of the total words of this whole thing that just got used simply on Haman's title and description. Hang on a minute. I'm not going to make you listen to the whole thing, but I'm going to count up the total words here. Just a sec. And I'm back. Looks like there were 77 English words there. That's kind of an interesting Bible number. I mean, I don't think there's really actually anything to read into that. It's an English translation from Hebrew. It's 77, though. That's what I came up with. So now how many of those words were just dedicated to simply telling us who Haman is? Haman of Mattatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. I got 1/7 of the entire summary at the end of the book here being dedicated just to the name and titles of Haman. Come on, at some point, it's just math. And math tells me here that the author writing this summation of the story thinks Haman is a very, very important part of the story. And he goes on. So this Haman fellow with all the titles had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and had cast the poor. Okay, so now the second character is introduced. I'm labeling this. We got Haman, we got the Jews, and now we have the introduction of the concept of fate or providence, depending on who you're talking to. All right, so he wanted to destroy the Jews, cast the poor, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. Aha, look at that. There's another triplicate, right? So we get destroy, ruin, and destruction. That's interesting. Again, the economy of words here is very interesting. You only have 77 to work with, and you've already used 2 triplicates to explain what's going on, and kind of a duplicate in saying the poor, and that is the lot, back to back. But here we are at the halfway point of this summary, and what we see is that we know a lot about Haman. We know that he hated the Jews and he had a plan to kill them, and that he somehow tried to access fate to make that happen. Now, again, to the person who just got done reading Esther, we know that wasn't fate. What he was accidentally doing was accessing the eternal infinite mind of the one true God who's master over all of creation, maker of all things, ordainer of all things, and who operates inside and outside of time as a definitional attribute of who he is. So Haman thinks he's doing some kind of little pagan thing to access the spirits or whatever, but pretty quickly, even his wife, you'll recall, figured out, from their perspective, you have awakened the slumbering God of Abraham, and when people do that, they lose. So that's what we got in the halfway point of the story. We continue, verse 25. But when the plot came to the king's attention, well, that's passive voice. How did it come to the king's attention? Nobody did it, right? That's really clever writing right there. Great use of passive voice. From the perspective of the outsider, no one brought the plot to the king's attention. It just happened. And again, to the attentive reader who just got done reading the larger story of Esther, we remember that it happened at exactly the moment it needed to happen. So in a way, what you're detecting here is almost sort of the bashful summary that is intentionally so secure in the outcome. That's like, yeah, we went out, we played hard, we got the win today, we're happy. But if you just watched the game, you're like, oh my goodness, that was the most intense game ever. And there was heroism all over the field as your team rallied back and turned the tables. But then the coach is like, yeah, we played hard and we won. See, that's kind of a swagger move right there. So this plot, just came to the king's attention. And he issued written orders that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back on his own head. So now we get the same pivot point that we get in the larger telling of the story. And who does it come back upon? Who does this all reflect upon? Haman, and ultimately Haman's sons. So the only characters we actually get introduced to in this summary are Haman, a ton, the king, who doesn't get a name but is just the king, the Jews, and Haman's sons. Do you catch who's absent there? No specifically named Xerxes, no Mordecai, and no Esther, for whom the book ultimately ends up being named. Now, the larger book of Esther tells a much more robust story, but the story that we get here in the summary looks like it is mostly about how God's invisible providence defeated this evil man who represents the summation of all of the people who have ever wanted the destruction of the Jews And there's a warning implicit in this. Wanting the destruction of the Jews is going to boomerang on you. You will end up on your own gallows. Now, that's not me issuing a warning in some discreet, subtle way. That's what the text seems to be doing. This little summary is miles from the romantic retelling of the story that has been popular in the last few decades in Christian circles. It is miles from the retelling of female heroism, even though the rest of the story, I think, does give an account of a very robust, not Mary Sue female character who does amazing things and has to overcome her own problems, and I think maybe even still has meaningful problems at the end. That's a well-written, or maybe I should say well-described, three-dimensional female character. I think she's great, but she doesn't come up in this summary at all. Now, if you were just to read this summary alone and forget everything else you know, you and any other sane person would come away and say, this retelling is reframed or re-emphasized as a victory lap and as a warning about how what the pagans might imagine is fate, but what is really invisibly the hand of God, is at work to defeat the bloodthirsty enemies of the Jews and to return their evil energy back upon them, to reflect the bloodthirsty fate intended for the Jews back on the enemies of the Jews. Now, in the same way that if you hear somebody you love, you hear your kid summarize an event that you all watched in a way that has one specific, maybe even surprising point of emphasis, it doesn't change what the rest of the story was, and we all saw it. But that little time capsule, that little nugget, tells you what the recounter, the kid, in this case hypothetically, wanted the person they were talking to take from the story as they walked away. And I think we see that here as well. The point of the larger story stands, but this point of emphasis in the little recap at the end also cannot be ignored. My friends, if you are still with me at this point, I salute your patience with how my voice sounds. Thank you very, very much for enduring whatever this thing is that I am contending with right now. But here's the thing, man. I try not to miss a day. I think we've covered it all. I maybe had a day where Jeff covered or something, but I miss this when we don't do it. So I put on some pajamas and go in the basement and record a thing, hang out with my friends and talk about the Bible. Thank you for your patience with me. More on the home stretch of Esther tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.